Okay, we almost went crazy in the last video when we actually tried to find the show login method and the login method, and we couldn't find it. So let's deep dive and see what Laravel is doing for us, again, behind the scenes. We have a login controller, and Laravel uses this concept of single responsibility traits, which means define a trait and let that trait just have one responsibility. You'll see this everywhere around Laravel. So in this case, Laravel defines and authenticates users trait, and this trait is coming from Illuminate Foundation of Authenticate User. So it's coming from our vendor directory, and we can actually go ahead and see what this trait looks like. So I'll head over to the definition, and if we try to check out our show login form method, there we have it, and our login method, we actually have it right here also. So our show login method simply returns the view auth.login, just like we'd expect, right? Therefore, if you want to overwrite which view is rendered when a user visits the login route, all you can do is actually copy this method, head over to your login controller, paste that method in, and override what you want. Therefore, if I want to actually return a string, I can have return login page, as easy as that. If I head over back to my browser, try to visit the login page, now I have login page because I just overrode that method. This is the power of customization that Laravel gives to us. So that's how you can actually change the view. What about the login process completely? Let's go through it. In our authenticate user, let's find our login method and head to it. Handle a login request to the application. Looks like we're calling a validate login method, and you need to notice something. Laravel is always going to be referencing methods, or I'll call them hooks, where we can actually completely customize the functionality of our application. So here we have login, and it's calling a validate login method on this trait. Therefore, let's find that validate login method. And this validate login method is actually in charge of validating the data we receive from our front end. And if you want to completely override the validate login for your login process, maybe making sure that the user provides the email and the password 2 times, or the email and his name, or whatever you want to do during the login process validation, this is where you go to. Again, another thing we need to notice is the validate login method is calling a this username method again on this trait. So let's get to the username method, and what this simply does is returns a string, right? So get the login username to be used by the controller. You might find yourself in situations where you want to actually log in the user using the phone or the user's name rather than the email. Therefore, maybe in your front end, you're receiving the name of the user, not necessarily the email. What do? All you need to do is override this username method, and that's it. You're done. Laravel is going to automatically take care of every other thing. Let's go ahead and see this in action. If I copy this, head over to my login controller, paste that in, and let's say we want to actually log in the user using the user's name in the database. Would come here and would return the name of that field, and that is name. In case it was phone, then you're gonna put in phone, or in case it was username, you're gonna put in username. So now we are telling Laravel to authenticate the user using the name, so we need to pass in the name field from our front end. I'll head over to my login.blade, and right down here where we have email, I'm gonna change this to name. So the type is gonna be text, the ID is gonna be name is gonna be name, and this is very important because if you check out your authenticate users validate login method, it's passing in the username right here as the validation. Therefore, it wants a name key, and it should be a required string, right? In the case where it was returning email, it was actually email embedded right here. So we want to make sure we pass in the name, and we also want to display validation errors for the name, and name also the name, and all of that, and I think that's set up. Okay, so we are passing the name and the password to Laravel, and we've told Laravel the username to use is not the email but the name field in the database. So if you're not comfortable with this, you can just go ahead and set up name also, and finally your name right here. Okay, so let's go ahead and try this out in our browser. So your name, I'm gonna put in the user's name and his password, and click on the login button, and we're redirected to our home page. It just works as easy as that. So in less than a few seconds, we've been able to change our authentication system from email based to name based just by overwriting one single method. one single method, and that is the method. Okay, so username, and we change that to name. That's it. How cool is this? Laravel gives us an extensive customization possibility once you know how everything works behind the scenes. Okay, so let's continue with our login method. There is still a lot of customization that Laravel provides for us. In our authenticate users trait, we have the validation for the username, and this is going to validate our data. Next, we have Laravel trying to take care of too many login attempts. So if the password was wrong or the email was wrong more than 3 times or 4 times, depending on how you configure it, Laravel is automatically going to lock out the user and say, oh no, you can't log in until maybe past a period of 1 to 2 minutes. Then where does the login process actually happen? Right here. If this attempt to log in, then send login response. Okay, so attempt to login is a method on this trait. What does it do? It calls the guard, which means you can actually customize the guard because we are referencing a method. So right down here we have a guard. Get the guard to be used during authentication. Laravel still gives us the possibility of overwriting this, and it attempts to authenticate the user, passing in these credentials and a boolean whether the remember field was in the request or not. Okay, so this credentials is another method, and what it does is it gets the username. So in case you are using an email, it gets the email, and in case you are using a name field like we are doing now, it's gonna get the name field, and then it gets the password. Now it tries to authenticate the user, returns a true or false, and in our login method, it checks if that operation was successful. If it was successful, we have a send login response method that takes care of responding to this situation. Let's head over to our send login response, and what does this do? Generates a session for the user, clears all the login attempts in case the user tried to authenticate himself more than once, and then it calls an authenticated method, passes in the request and passes in the authenticated user, or it redirects the user to the intended page, or it redirects the user to the redirect path method. So Laravel is simply calling methods on these traits, and it's giving us an extensive possibility of customizing. Now, what if you wanted to maybe redirect the user to the welcome page after login? This is a method that Laravel is calling, and this is the method. It's simply empty right here. It means we can put in whatever we want to put in right there. So let's copy this and try to rewrite it. So what do we want? We want to redirect the user to the home page, right? So return a redirect to the home page. So rather than /home, we are going to redirect the user to the main page of the website after the user is logged in. Okay, now this is simply how we can customize. In case you had an Ajax login, then right here you'll be returning an Ajax response. In case you wanted to verify the user or send an email, this is where you're going to be doing it, in this authenticated method. And what happens in our authenticate users trait, our send login response is going to check if this method is null. If it's not null, it means you've actually customized it and put something in it, then it's going to call that method. Or if it's null, it's simply going to return a redirect to the intended page. Okay, so maybe where the user was going to before he was locked out and sent to the authentication page, or it's going to call this redirect path method. And this redirect path method actually gives us the possibility of customizing what happens when the user is logged in. So if you don't want to use this, you can actually configure this. So let's go ahead and see how this authenticated method operates. In our login controller, we need to pull in that request. So let's go ahead and make sure nothing breaks by using the request at the top. And we expect that when we successfully log in, we are redirected to the home page, right? Let's go ahead and try this out. I'll log out, go to the login page. And now we are no longer logging in with email because we overwrote that method, and now we are logging in with our name and the password. So login. There we go. We are redirected to the home route rather than the home page. Okay, so to the front of our website rather than the home page. That's how easy it is to customize what happens when the user is logged in. So this is the send login response. This is what happens when the user successfully logs in. We can customize that by simply overwriting the authenticated method. Now, finally, before we hit pause on this video or we close for the day, let's check out what happens when the user fails to authenticate himself. It's going to increment login attempts, that if this if statement fails, right? So the attempt login returned a boolean, which is false. It's going to increment login attempts. And of course, this is taken care by Laravel's throttles logins.php, which is also a trait that Laravel gives by default. And it's going to return whatever is in this send field login response method. Let's visit the send field login response method, and we can customize this method if we want to. So if I want to control what happens when the user fails to log in, I can simply override this method in my controller. Therefore, in my login controller, I'll paste that in, and when the user fails to log in, I'm simply going to return a string that says login failed. Let me log out and head to my login page, put in the credentials, and I'm going to put in a fake password. Click on the login button. Yeah, and there we go. We have login failed. As easy as that. Just one method. Laravel gives us the possibility of overwriting the whole system. Therefore, anything you want to do, you can actually do. In case you want to control what happens when there's a failed login response, you can simply define a method in your login controller. In case you want to control what happens when the user is authenticated, you can also use a method. In case you want to change what system or what database column we want to use to authenticate the user, you can also do that. So Laravel gives us the possibility of completely customizing our system in whatever way we want. Okay, so this must have been the longest video in this series. We're gonna hit pause for a moment and continue in the very next video.